me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello.
Good afternoon, everybody. 5 o'clock on a Friday again. So hope you've had a very successful week of practice, maybe availing yourself of all of the wonderful resources online beyond those that you had me at Cello. And now we come to just hopefully what has become a routine, a little moment to pause at 5 on a Friday before we get started with the weekend work to do a Cello Chat interview. And with me today is Meryl Geib. I'm very excited to have her as my guest. How are you, Meryl?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing really quite well, all things considered. Just got that technology glitch taken care of.
Indeed.
It seems to be where you can never take it for granted that everything's going to work hunky-dory. All right. Well, for our viewers, would you tell about your musical background? What brought you to cello in the first place, and how did you get where you are?
Yes. Well, I started cello when I was around 9 years old. The local orchestra program in Oklahoma City, I was in the school district called Putnam City, and they brought the middle school students in to play their instruments for us. And somebody who has now become a good friend of mine named Tracy Berlin was the cellist, and she played the open strings, and I was hooked. I just fell in love with just the open strings of the cello. And I was so motivated, my dad took me to an orchestra concert at the local symphony, which is called the Oklahoma City Philharmonic. And at the start of every concert, they play the Star Spangled Banner. Okay. And so you stand up and I'm not a particularly athletic person. And so I noticed on the stage that the cellists were allowed to sit down. And I said, this is probably the right instrument for me. I'm not coordinated enough to stand up and play, so I should always be sitting. So that's really what hooked me. And then from there, it was just passionate teachers who inspired me and gave me room to find my own voice. As a youngest sibling, sometimes I felt stifled. I was an incredibly shy student, and I was reluctant to raise my hand in class and speak with my own voice, but through the cello, I found my voice. So I just feel really lucky that the cello became such a central part of my life. And now I get to share it with other students who may be discovering their own voices or may be just needing that little boost of confidence. Oh, I can play this next harder scale. I can do this next arpeggio, and I can add another slur. So just fun things like that. I was very, very lucky to have some wonderful cellists as my first teachers. Dorothy Hayes was my very first teacher in our little orchestra class in fourth grade. And she herself is a fantastic cellist and so inspiring. And she also could play all the other instruments equally well. So that just boggled my mind as a little kid. And I would just watch her and try to absorb everything I could. And so I was lucky to have her from elementary school into middle school. In high school, I got to work under Steve Frazier, and he was also a cellist. So not often are your high school directors all cellists. So it was fantastic. And I learned a lot from him, and he helped guide my decision to go to college for cello. So he was very inspiring the way he led the orchestra. And I didn't see myself teaching in an orchestra class because I figured it was safer to stay seated. I'm not athletic. I don't want to be waving my arms in front of the group. But it was very inspiring to have those two people, Dorothy and Steve, who are now friends, now that I'm back in Oklahoma City. And so then I went off to University in Texas, and I studied with Dr. Morrow. In the interim, I had studied with Dr. Tess Remy-Schumacher at UCO all through high school. And she inspired me to really engage in solo music and and try to play things that I probably shouldn't have been playing. She said, "Oh, it's not too hard for you. Let's just look at it." So I would end up playing the Lalo Concerto a little bit too soon, but I worked up to it and all those hours of practice. And then Dr. Morrow, her diligent preparation of everything was just amazing. Just the discipline to focus on the details. That's what I took away from her. And then I ended up in Nebraska with Dr. Karen Becker, and she just let me go crazy with what I wanted to play. I could play anything I wanted to, and really craft my own path. And we talked a lot about teaching cello, because by that point I had decided I don't want to just be a performer. I want to teach. I want to help give the opportunity that I was so lucky to have. I want to give that opportunity to others. So that's kind of my cello journey. And now I'm back in Oklahoma, hopefully carrying out what I want to do and helping a lot of young cellists become just that little bit much better, gaining another voice.
It is very rewarding teaching, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, that's great. Your 3 college cello teachers are all dear friends, and it is interesting to take any set of people that one knows and think comparing different people's approaches. But yeah, so you just even in your description there, you already were able to hit upon several things relating to motivation. But I definitely want to segue straight to that question, that important question of motivating students to practice. But so, you were talking about inspiring them to, even if it's just to be able to get that one additional shift or that one additional tricky passage or whatever. So is there a degree to which the kind of like the stepping stones, the gratis ad parnassum, helping them to see that next attainable goal and figure out how to achieve it? What is your approach for motivation?
I think first is always the desire to see the end goal. So it might be a piece that they're not quite ready for. And then we just take a copy of the first page, because we don't want to look at all of the pages right away. And we start to break it down. And for me, that's saying, okay, what scales are in here? What keys do we move through in the progression? Are there arpeggios? Is it mainly stepwise? Is it mainly jumps? And of course, we start this very young in my studio. We start talking about the different types of motions of how to move through the piece of music. The whole time, also listening to a complete recording is wonderful to guide our ears through the process, so that we're able to match up the smallest little increment of steps with the bigger picture. And I think that's just so fun to see it click and see the students take that idea and run with it. When they first say, "Oh, well, that's just a G major scale." Oh, I love hearing that. So even if it doesn't start on a G, they'll say, "Oh, well, I see this matches." So it's kind of an investigation of what makes up this piece of music. And once you get it with one piece of music, it's easier to get it with all the others. So as we're marching through our progression of pieces, whichever book that they're more inspired by, be it Suzuki, Royal Conservatory, any of them, we look for those little clues. And we start in my studio, we start that very young. And so even just Song of the Wind, what scale is that? What is this, like your arpeggio? Oh, cool. So I think when a student comes to me later and they haven't had that experience yet, it's a light bulb moment when we might be working on Bach and we are able to say, well, in Suite 1, on that second page, when you're going back and forth between the D string and the A string, what is actually your left hand doing? Oh, it's just a scale. And it's another light bulb moment. So no matter how hard or how easy the piece is, we can find those keys to success. And knowing our scales and our arpeggios are a big part of that. And I think it takes some students a long time to find that out, and others less time. But if you do that work ahead of time, as soon as that light bulb moment happens, recognizing what makes up our music, I find the students double their scale and arpeggio practice on their own. I don't have to tell them. I try not to tell them how much to practice or exactly what to practice, because I want them to find their own investigation. Now, at the early stages, I really do say, let's practice this little spot. But later on, when they're finding their own motivation, that's my goal.
Wow, that was a lot. There were now, I think, 4 points in there I really liked. The one you highlighted, of course, as far as if you not just occasionally, but routinely connect why we're having to learn these scales and arpeggios with the spots that they apply to in the music, really does help them to bridge that connection. And then probably ending then with the biggest picture thing of, once any of us get to the point where we are our own teacher and we have our own favorite approaches to problem solving, then one of the things that we can problem solve is, all right, what do I want to do next on this next piece and how do I want to solve it? And that is its own motivation to get the cello back out and to do that. But two other things that you hit on in there, one of them, for example, just starting with the first page, because I think it's just kind of a human nature thing for a lot of students to want to tackle the entire thing all at once. And then their attention is so diluted that all sorts of things, they just don't necessarily become aware of certain things that they need that awareness of, that analysis is so important, or bad habits can creep in because they're just trying to bite off more than they can chew. So taking smaller bites is definitely something that they don't necessarily learn to do without some help. And then the other thing, as far as this interesting situation with a lot of youngsters where they're, what is the expression, if I say bite off more than they can chew, if I stay with that kind of that, is when people say somebody's eyes are bigger than their stomach, and they think they can tackle more advanced repertoire. They want to immediately play, they're going to be this little, and want to play the Dvorak concerto. And we've seen that some kids at a very young age can play the Dvorak concerto, but if you try to tackle something that's well beyond your technique, there's a reason why we tend to learn certain aspects of technique in a particular order. So, for example, if you have a student like that who is really, really anxious to learn this piece, do you have ways to kind of line up pieces that either sound like that piece in the meantime while it's helping them to learn those spots, or take bits and pieces that they can learn now? What's your approach for those sorts of situations?
Definitely. Well, I think of one student in particular who I taught about 10 years ago now, and he was so motivated, and it took a lot of discipline with his parents to help hold him back a little bit so he wasn't diving into the deep end of the pool and potentially injuring himself. That's the other thing, when the youngsters want to play up here and go into the thumb position a little too soon, and we haven't done the muscle development or the flexibility exercises. And I came to his lesson one day, and he had hidden the Dvorak concerto. He was hiding it from me. And of course, I was like, oh, let me just see your music. Let's see what we're going to work on. And I was flipping back. What is this? So rather than just take it away from him, what we did was we outlined little spots he could start practicing right now. And we taped Post-it notes over the spots he shouldn't be practicing at his current level. And his parents would go and they check that his taped areas were still there every day when he was practicing. So he wasn't allowed to practice alone for a little while. But it makes a big difference when you're prepared to take on those big shifts and those big moments. And I think of the Elgar Concerto, the first thing we do before we ever pull it out is just start practicing our E minor scales. And we start practicing that very top octave on its own. And again, if they've already made the connection of, oh, these scales and arpeggios, they're the building blocks of everything, then they start doing that work ahead of time, really on their own without me, pushing them and saying, okay, let's do this now. let's suffer. Yeah, that's one thing I loved with Tess. She called it torture, but it doesn't have to be torture. It can be a healthy diet of scales and arpeggios to help you build your next piece. And so part of my planning process, when I decide, okay, they need to move on to Elegy by Fauré, we start really diving deeper into our C minor scales. We start diving deeper into our E flat major scales and getting those patterns automated. And what's great with automation too is the kids see it these days. When I was a kid, you didn't see so much automation in the world. It was fascinating when I learned to do my first macro on Excel. I was like, wow, it can do everything for me. But now we have Roombas going around the living room, vacuuming for us. So it's automated. So a lot of jumps in technology that we can now pull from what the kids see in their daily lives and pull into cello and say, let's take what this little robot vacuum can do for us. What if our hand could just vacuum up the right notes?
Nice.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, another set of things that I wanted to be sure to ask you about. I think one of the very most inspiring and motivating things for any given student is when their teacher is leading by example. And so, for example, you started a scholarship program.
Yes.
Tell a little bit about that.
Well, that started when I moved back to Oklahoma. It was the throes of the Great Recession, and there wasn't a lot of opportunities. But one thing around the area, there's a lot of churches, and there's a lot of music in the churches, but there weren't a lot of orchestras in the churches. And I just wondered why. So I ended up running into a friend's mother and helped them out at Christmas time. And then we became good friends. And we said, there's a need in the community. There's just a lot of kids who want to share their music. They may not have a faith. They may not have a connection to a church, but the church can help the community in providing them a place to hone their craft. And that's how the chamber orchestra at this church began, was just paying students. It was an internship type fee. So a little less than professionals, but more than they were going to get volunteering for the time, because so many of us as musicians have been asked, oh, well, will you play this wedding for exposure? Will you do this for a meal? And meal doesn't pay the electric bill. It doesn't put gas in our cars. So we talked about it, and there was a very generous donor who had left money to the church specifically for scholarships, but there weren't any young people in the church at the time. So the idea was, let's bring young people in who want to play music. They don't have to believe, they don't have to, become part of the church, but the church can help them and give them a scholarship and pay them for their good work. And that's exactly what happened. And it's still running today. It's been 12 years now. And a lot of our students are now professionals in the area. And some of them have started playing in high school, and now they're teaching in the schools. And they're not necessarily members of a church or anything, but they gained the skills. And it's just fantastic that we were able to pull that off and work it out so that the kids had the opportunity to play their music and to do it for what they deserve to earn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that is the Edmund Chamber Orchestra?
No, the Edmund Chamber Orchestra is a different entity. That was founded by John Clinton, and it's kind of not around anymore, but we hope it will come back. COVID and everything just kind of messed with a lot of things. So we're lucky that the scholarship program at this church is still going. But there is talk at getting a scholarship orchestra going again at some point in Edmond.
Excellent, excellent. So, and now what is the Oklahoma City Cello Project?
Right, that started in 2016, and it was an opportunity to have music outside of the schools, outside of competition type ideas. So many of the kids have these auditions and they have competitions that they're competing against. It was a way for cellists to come together and be friendly. And it was for pre-collegiate cellists especially. And so in 2016, we had a rock shop. So everybody learned how to do the chop bow stroke. And we played, my husband did arrangements of an Adele song. And I think that video is still on Facebook somewhere. And it was just a blast. And then we were able to link up with the Oklahoma City Philharmonic, and Joshua Roman did a master class, and the students played out in the lobby before his big concert, and they got to attend the concert for free. So it was just 5 cello teachers in our area who got together: Meredith Blackwells, Valerie Tachi, Emily Stoops, Angelica Mocknick-Jones, and myself. We got together and decided there's not enough for our young cellists. We want cello music everywhere. And we did that. And it was very, very rewarding. So we're hoping to maybe do that again at some point as things start to open up and become a little more normal, and just give the students more opportunities. Something that did help grow from that is our local American String Teachers Association chapter saw the kids are hungry for non-competitive things. So we brought in ASTA CAP, the ASTA Certificate Advancement Program, and Angelica Mocknick-Jones helped start that going. And so it was wonderful, wonderful.
That is great. I had not made that connection before. So then several of you whom I got to play the Evan Tonsing Elegy for Justice with years ago were this core member of the Cello Project. That's very neat. I love, and the fact that not only then the private teachers, it sounds from on a regular basis that the cello professors in Oklahoma are really, not rivals, but work together toward the same end, which is again what ASTA is all about too. And your husband Michael, a bass player, and you are both very active in ASTA, state level and national level. What are some of the things that are going on with respect to, and you mentioned ASTA CAP, are there other ways that the state or national ASTA
Right.
Government is?
ASTA has been one of the best ways to lead by example, because we tell our students to continually improve themselves. Well, ASTA helps us improve, and it helps us to see teaching trends from around the country, from around the world, understand deeper meanings behind these connections that we can make. And it's wonderful. Our local chapter, we've been really working to bring in our college students together. So again, not thinking of all the schools as rival schools, but recognizing there's not a lot of us string teachers. And we're spread pretty thin in Oklahoma. It's a very large state. And so we're very spread out. So we want to bring all our college students. I think October 21st, we're having a college student Halloween party. So anytime you can dress up, it's great. So the kids will be able to get together, and ASTA will throw them a party. And of course, we're there to act as mentors. If there's students who see themselves in private studio, we have plenty of private studio teachers, ones who are geared toward public education, we're ready for that. And those who want to teach in college level, where we've got lots of great representation, because we have to work together. It's a pretty big state and very spread out. And then ASTACAP, we hold that in February because it balances when the national ASTACAP, the online version is. There's one in June and one in November. And the one we hold in February helps our kiddos get ready for solo and ensemble contest.
Sure. Very nice. Very nice. So in addition to the October 21st, what other performances do you have coming down the pike this fall, or projects?
Well, let's see. I'm anticipating Trans-Siberian Orchestras touring again, so I'll probably be playing with them. That's always a fun one. I'll get a sample of the music and I'll show the kiddos, hey, what scale are you practicing? Here's an E minor scale in this music. And so I can show them real world examples of their scales. And I think Michael Bublé is on tour again, so we're playing that one. Locally, my husband and I play in the Enid Symphony Orchestra. And I think we have 2 or 3 concerts this fall and maybe 3 concerts in the spring. So we'll have a good deal, and a couple of those are outreach concerts to the public schools, part of the Carnegie Link Up initiative. So always something that on the practice stand. And between lessons, I'm learning my own notes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that's inspiring too. That's great. Well, thanks so much, Meryl. This has been a lot of fun, and I know lots of food for thought for people about to spend a weekend of practicing.
Yes.
All right. Well, take care, everybody. We'll see you this time next Friday. Happy practicing.